I hope it comes across as revolutionary. And if I can just close with this story. About 7 or 8 years ago, I was speaking to a group of lawyers, a distinguished group of lawyers, and introducing some of these concepts. And a lawyer from Chicago, when I finished the presentation, was the second to raise his hand to ask questions. And his question was very profound. He said, what you're talking about is revolutionary. And he then went on with a question, and I was, in answering his question about it being revolutionary and the other aspect, this is part of what I said. I said, Lou, you're absolutely right. This is revolutionary. Purposeful planning and purposeful trusts and gifts are so revolutionary, I've traced them back to George Washington. Now remember, Washington had no children of his own. So Washington's will was handwritten, 30 pages, but inside it I have found 4 what I consider to be powerful, purposeful clauses. And I'm just going to share one of these in closing, Peter, which is an example of how we can transfer values and legacy. So in the gift that he made to his nephews, who were his closest blood kin, he said, to each of my nephews, and he names the 5, I leave one of my swords, each to choose in the order in which he is named, and that they will hold this sword with the following solemn injunction, that they will never raise it, except it be in the case of self-defense or in defense of our nation and its liberties, and in the latter event, that they would prefer falling with this sword in their hands to the relinquishment thereof. Now, in about 75 words, Washington electroplated those metal objects with a protective coat of purpose and meaning. And I've thought about what probably happened with those swords. I think the nephews took the swords, most likely put them in a prominent place in their home, probably had the words from Washington's handwritten will inscribed below, and whenever a guest or a family member would come, they would enjoy taking them over, showing them George Washington's sword, and then reading the words of the gift, this legacy gift that Washington had made. Now, to show how powerful that influence was, those 75 words, 4 of those 5 swords today are housed at Mount Vernon. In the 1930s, they were given by 6th and 7th generation Washington nephew descendants to the Martha Washington Foundation, which is the owner of Mount Vernon, to be displayed for the public to see these relics. What happened to the 5th sword? That sword ended up in the estate of a young grandson of a nephew who died, leaving a widow, 2 children, very young, and more debts than assets. So it was an insolvent estate, and his assets had to be sold, and the sword was sold. And the eventual purchaser was J.P. Morgan, who gave that sword to a museum in New York State. But had it not been for an untimely death and insolvency, that sword, I'm convinced, would be at Mount Vernon as well. So that's just a dramatic but simple example of how powerful a legacy can be. And we don't have to be George Washington, and we don't have to have swords, but there's a way in which each of us can create a powerful personal legacy that will be enduring.